I would like to introduce Donny Winter now. I'm really excited that he's here. He's been working with us for a long time. He is a longtime friend of the Roethke House. Donny is an LGBTQ plus poet, a YouTube blogger, an educator, and activist residing in Midland, Michigan. He's the author of 3 collections of poems, and tonight I believe we're going to read from Casting Seeds.
We're going to read all of them.
Oh, we're going to read them all. Okay, so Carbon Footprint, Feats of Alchemy, and Casting Seeds, which is the most recent one. He's received 3 Pushcart Prize nominations and a Best of the Net nomination. His poems have been published in journals and magazines such as Awakened Voices magazine, Culture Cult magazine, Flypaper Lit, Kaiju Ramen, and Central Review. A graduate of University of Central Missouri, Donny teaches writing at Delta College and at Saginaw Valley State University, and he regularly leads writing workshops here, including one coming up on August 24th. So if this reading leaves you inspired, please come back and do some writing with Donny. In his first chapbook collection of poems, Donny takes readers back to his childhood growing up in rural northern Michigan. Written entirely in the Japanese tanka form, these poems invite readers to join him at the kitchen table with his grandma Winter to enjoy a cup of tea and watch the natural world. Casting Seeds acts as a love letter to his grandmother, her house, and his family's property, all of which still bearing the warmth of childhood memory. Through these poems, Winter seeks to cast for others the same seeds his grandmother planted in him, a knowledge that we linger in the spaces we inhabit, leave imprints of ourselves for others to harvest, and possess the power to rebuild ourselves into beings free from our childhood bullies. Please welcome Donny Winter.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sherrin, for that wonderful introduction. It was amazing. And of course, thank you to the Roethke Museum for being such a pivotal space in our community, for not only providing, preservation legacy of Theodore Roethke himself and his works, but also by bringing people together like this in the form of readings, workshops. Like, I think writing creates so much community, reading as well. We love reading and writing together. They create so much community, and I think that spaces like these are crucial, especially considering the difficult times that we're in when we have states that are literally promoting book bans and passing legislation, limiting people's access and people's stories altogether. So for the reading tonight, I'm going to be delivering a buffet of poetry from all 3 of my collections, but I am going to be focusing largely on Casting Seeds, my most recent collection. And I'm going to kind of frame it in the context of what I would think Theodore Roethke would think these days if he were alive, being a nature poet himself. Like, how would he perceive the things happening in the world right now? With that thought in mind, I'd like to begin my readings with an epigraph poem. So like a poem to kind of start things off. And I felt that it would be fitting to begin with a poem written by Theodore Roethke himself. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's titled Moss Gathering. To loosen with all 10 fingers held wide and limber, and lift up a patch, dark green, the kind for lining cemetery baskets, thick and cushiony, like an old-fashioned doormat. The crumbling small hollow sticks on the underside mixed with roots, and wintergreen berries and leaves still stuck to the top. That was moss gathering. But something always went out of me when I dug loose those carpets of green or plunged to my elbows in the spongy, yellowish moss of the marshes. And afterwards, I always felt mean, jogging back over the logging road as if I had broken the natural order of things in that swampland, disturbed some rhythm, old and of vast importance, by pulling up flesh from the living planet, as if I had committed, against the whole scheme of life, a desecration. So in preparation for this reading, I typically go back and read the entire collected works in this book. And that poem, for some reason, really struck me because being that we're in a climate crisis right now, I feel like day to day, like so many people have small interactions with the planet that we kind of don't really acknowledge, whether it be celebrating the space around us or desecrating a space around us. And I think that it bears conversation. Like, I think we need to have more conversation about it, considering the dire circumstances that we are in at this time. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to read a couple of poems from Casting Seeds, and then I'm going to take us through the buffet of poems after that. But so Casting Seeds, this is my latest collection. It is very much a celebration of my grandmother. My grandmother, when I was just a wee kid, was the first person to kind of like teach me some sense of self. And as a young queer person at that time, like I kind of attached myself to her because I felt like she was one of the only people I could go to free of judgment. Like I wasn't being judged in any sense of the imagination by her. So now these poems, as Sherrin mentioned in the introduction, are written in Tanka style. So some of them are very short. They're like 5 lines long. So the first one I'm going to read is just a very short poem celebrating the moment when I saw my grandmother gardening for the first time and realized I kind of like plants. I kind of like gardening. I want to just be in the dirt. Okay. So this poem is titled Sprout. I began a sprout on a warm spring afternoon, and while the sun sank far beyond the western field, she sat, a sun hat, her shield. Just a short one. Just a short one. I have kind of developed an obsession with sun hats, probably because of her. So thank you, Grandma, for that. I love plants and sun hats now. But I like there, and if anybody reads the rest of this collection, there's a few poems where like I kind of recount that moment where I saw her just throwing weeds in the air, sitting on this wooden crate in the middle of a field. And she just gestured me over. She was like, come on over here, come on over here. And she just let me play in the dirt for like the entire afternoon. And since then, I spiraled into being obsessed with gardening. So, okay. So the next poem is a little bit more of a political piece. It's also in Casting Seeds. While writing this book, it was around like the 4th of July one year. And I remember so many people in my life being super excited about going to see the fireworks. And aside from like maybe doing fireworks at home or something like that, I'm just like, people really get super excited about fireworks these days. And for some reason, I just don't get that excited about fireworks anymore. And I kind of tied that to kind of how I feel about the state of the world. And I wrote this toward the latter part of the pandemic, so you can probably imagine the existential crisis that was sitting in at that time. So this poem is titled Once Innocent Fireworks. We remember well the long, tired afternoons when the sun would sink westward behind thunderheads and the night veiled overhead. We'd play in the field until the lightning bugs came, signaling it's time. Kaleidoscopes of colors, spiderweb above the moon. Now, joy has gone gray, and we sit at home alone while parades go by, while fireworks peak above trees far from where we are yonder. Now we quake in the light of the hollowness of cracks, the thunder sadness. Now these colors have gone gray and the stars are too dim to see. Now as smoke screens whirl, these once innocent fireworks have lost their spirit to me. So commencing now to the buffet of poetry. I don't know why I'm feeling how about calling it a buffet, so just bear with me. So this next piece is one that I wrote in my first collection, Carbon Footprint. And this is another celebration of my grandmother. I My grandmother's house is currently vacant, and due to a family tragedy that happened a few years ago, that house is going to probably be demolished in the next year or so. And it's a space, like I grew up in this house. It was a very important space to me. And despite the traumatic event that happened, like it didn't make me forget about those memories and the importance that space holds for me. So that's partially why I wrote the other collection, Casting Seeds, because I wanted to kind of capture that space and kind of commemorate it in the form of a book. But even early on in my work, I took small moments and wrote about that space. So this poem is titled Cinder Blocks, The Cinder Blocks Remember. I wrote this poem at a point where I don't know what we were doing. I was outside at my grandma's house and I like scraped some old blue paint off the foundation and saw that the original paint was pink. What a selection, right? It was painted in the 60s, so that might explain why it was pink. But I was just like, there's so much about this house I don't even know. So I wrote this poem. It's titled The Cinder Blocks Remember. Fingerprints are fossils on countertops, and the thermostat has forgotten its function. Each room sits preserved like abandoned museum exhibits, and the walls creak as they waken with my footfalls. The house stirs back, but strains to breathe. My father's voice lingers in the background and speaks to the beat of these dry 1960 beams. I take out my phone to capture the space and smile at its futuristic glow that seems out of place, but I must record to remember. I wonder if these walls recognize me all these years later. I've grown up and all perspectives have changed. Tables have shrunk and the ceiling fan strings tickle my forehead like willow branches combing across a late summer yard. At first, I'm a time traveler, but so much is the same. I'm 13, and each window is a matte painting framing every familiar view. A field rolls toward an amber sunset. The Jackpine waves hello in the kitchen, and the woods stretch behind. Yes, Grandma's house is cold now, but underneath rotted composite, a desperate layer of pastel blue and a coat of forgotten pink. These cinder blocks still remember. It's going to be a really rough day when the house gets demolished, but I'm very happy that I'm able to use this mode of expression to kind of capture those memories a little bit. So the next poem that I'm going to perform for you is one of the early pieces in Carbon Footprint. It's very much mental health themed. 4 years into therapy, just going to be honest, I still have this tendency of struggling with a little self-deprecation. I kind of pass it off as being a charm, but it can probably be annoying for some who are very close to me. So early on in this book, I wrote a poem titled Letter from a Self-Deprecator. And it's directed to people who are just incredibly gracious in bearing with that. Dear incredibly patient person, thank you. I know I fall with cloudburst force, and I'm sorry. The dam in my rib cage has cracks. I know I'm a lot. And never passed the safety inspections because I overreact. Some days I'm a confused chickadee. I can't sing blissful songs and I peck at my own reflection, and I'm sorry for that too, though I ruffle my feathers to seem larger as I always act so small. And gradually, I accept what I see as a foggy mirage wiped away, a summer shower that leaves ditches dredged. Yet I imprint a softness behind. A sadness is a quickened deluge that fades against a patched roof, and thankfully looks normal, that doesn't drip, and is low maintenance, I swear. So, keep the buckets in the basement because I'm fine. Sincerely, the ceiling isn't leaking. Denial, love it. So it's late summer. For some reason in late summer, I'm always being dismal and thinking about death from time to time. And I know. And because we're
As it does.
right, as one does, because we're nearing fall, and symbolically speaking, well, things are dying to prepare itself for the winter time, right? So I wrote this poem in my second collection. This is Feats of Alchemy. It's a bit of a darker collection of poems. It's very much still has a lot of nature imagery, but it's more queer coded, let's just say. But I had to write this poem about the different ways that we try to preserve things. So this poem is titled Desperate Preservation. A child tapes fallen leaves back to trees because he can't bear to watch them die. Dreams he kept them alive. A woman flips through smudged scrapbook pages because she kept her former lover's roses preserved in nonstick coffins. A man stuffs the dog he had for 15 years, tortured by his calculated euthanasia, all to keep his eyes open. A teenager pins the butterflies across her car's grill in boxes to keep them beautiful, imagines they still fly. And the embalmer repaints, smiles on cold faces, and prepares the deceased for one last performance, still presentable even in death. Now, here's a method to my madness. So the reason I wrote that poem, that first stanza about the child taping the fallen leaves, the first fall that I was like 7 or 8 years old. I kind of realized because somebody told me, oh, the trees are dying for winter. So I was like having like this crisis over trees dying. So my grandmother one afternoon found me trying to tape like, with duct tape leaves back to a tree. She probably was like, is he all right? What's going on with him? But it's one of those like memories that stick with you that makes for an interesting poem, I think. So back to Roethke really quickly. I'm going to read an ekphrastic poem. So for those of you unfamiliar with what an ekphrastic poem is, it's a poem that either engages in conversation or responds to another piece of media or art. And periodically I write them in response or engaging in conversation with other poems. So reading another one of Roethke's poems, one of my favorite poems by him is Root Cellar. Has anybody read that poem before? I'm so obsessed with that poem. It's so good. And in my collection, Feats of Alchemy, I responded to it with a poem. So I'm going to read Theodore Roethke's Root Cellar first. So here is that. Root Cellar. Nothing would sleep in that cellar, dank as a ditch. Bulbs broke out of boxes, hunting for chinks in the dark. Shoots dangle and droop, lolling obscenely from mildewed crates, hung down long yellow evil necks like tropical snakes. And what a congress of stinks! Roots ripe as old bait, pulpy stems rank, silo rich, leaf mold, manure, lime piled against slippery planks. Nothing would give up life. Even the dirt kept breathing a small breath. I think I love that poem because he just like recognizing like the small instances of life in a very like desolate space is I loved his attention to detail. Loved his attention to detail. So the poem that I wrote in response in Feats of Alchemy is titled The Root Cellar Rages. When fallow, greenhouses are hellscapes, dry and vacant. However, when the root cellar is forgotten, it stirs, and tendrils eventually peek from subterranean cages, manic in the damp, until their prison walls fall to sprouts, hungry for the sun. Short piece. I think for me, I kind of find the greenhouse to be a bit of a desolate place. one is not tended to. Case in point, I was explaining to Elizabeth earlier that I left my numerous tomato plants I had left over in my greenhouse over the past summer, forgot to water them, and of course it's like 100 degrees in there and they died. So I was like, I really need to tend to the plants in the greenhouse. So it felt fitting to kind of weave that poem into this. So back to casting seeds. I don't think I've ever performed this poem before. So does anybody out there have like trauma connected to animals dying by any chance? I might a little bit. So just a trigger warning, this poem is about an animal dying. If you were not a fan of that, plug your ears. But when I was a kid, I opened the door to my grandma's house too quickly and slammed it shut. It scared a bird on her bird feeder and it hit the window. And well, being the 8-year-old I was kind of alarmed by that experience. So I decided to write a poem about it because I really think it shaped me as a kid. The poem is titled The Dying Bird, and it's situated in numbered stanzas. 1. Door slam, window thump. These feet scuffled, feathers flew across the lawn. Float, downy down, ash fluttering on grass, a bird on its back. 2. Tiny fingers scooped the stressed sparrow from the ground. It gasped, then sat, until its beak slowly shut, all darkened eyes froze open. 3. It wasn't your fault, Grandma consoled from afar. I brought her the bird and let the rain fall from my eyes as I understood dying for the first time. 4. I shook. She cradled. We swaddled the lifeless husk together until we took it to the garden and buried it by a tree. 5. Grandma's glassy eyes stared out across the field as if in prayer, while I felt myself age more until I finally laid blame to rest. So, this other piece from Casting Seeds is about a tree. Anybody else tree huggers in here other than myself? Yes, I do love trees very much. There is this old, gross-looking jackpine in front of my grandma's house. It's been there. Like I remember seeing pictures of her house from the 60s, and that tree looked almost exactly the same in the 60s. So it has to be like well over 100 years old at this point. And everybody always just said horrible things about that tree because it looked gross. I thought it was really cool looking. It like if you've seen a jackpine, they kind of look like overgrown bonsai trees to me. And now that my grandma, it's been like over 20 years since she's passed away. Like whenever I look at it, I kind of think of her because it reminds me of her. So I wrote a poem about the tree that's titled Grandmother Jackpine. You wave me hello against your jagged arms, and they still dance against each sunset, weathered by last winter's snow, sagging with unopened cones. Even still, I sit, a child sprawled beneath your shade on a fresh mown lawn, unfazed by the sharpened grass, gravel indentations. Sometimes I return to trace faces in the bark, to salvage lost cones, to watch disheveled hands shift against the passage of clouds. When you wave goodbye, and as you fade against the west and the road behind, your unkept silhouette stands like a sentry against time. Yeah, and I was very blunt. I was like, when you demolish the house, do not touch the trees. Do not touch my trees. But anyway, I don't know what I would do if anything happened to it. So I'm going to move on to a few poems from my second collection, Feats of Alchemy. So there's some of these are going to be a little bit political, like writing about politics from time to time. Keeps life interesting. So this poem is titled Paper Mache. So this poem was written during the pandemic, and I remember it was inspired by an argument I got into with probably a family member. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we got into an argument about same-sex marriage, and there was kind of this latent fear in the air at that time, and still now, because at that time, that's when those documents from the Supreme Court were leaked, saying that they would consider reversing marriage equality at a certain point. So, being the hyper fixating person I am, I had to write a poem about it. So this poem is titled Paper Maches, and it is in response to that person who basically told me, don't be over dramatic. You're fine. That's never going to happen. Paper Maches, please tell us we're overreacting. By all means, tell us it'll never happen because the thought of it seems so improbable to you as you update your wedding registries, go to find your fittings, and have cakes eagerly made without any question or side glances. Please tell us it isn't about a piece of paper, that it's about being together. It's about the love because we mustn't know how to love after all our wasted years watching you and your happily ever afters on television from our cracked closet doors. Please tell us how unfair it is to not have a month to celebrate your pride, as if you've not been able to since your socially awkward elementary school square dance, since your first homecoming kiss, or since the first time you held hands at the family reunion while we watched and wished to know how it felt. Please pay attention. Lift the veil you'll never lose. Our bodies are yellowed paper maches, and the sequins we pretend are diamonds have lost their luster. Please keep room for our save the dates on your refrigerator doors, and retract the Hallmark cards you deliver in platitudes long enough to catch us before we're torn from these altitudes. Can you tell I was irritated? It's weird. I was so mad at that person. Anyway. In a more hopeful sense, this next poem is also political. I wrote this one around the same time, and I had this conversation I remember with a queer friend of mine, and we were talking about how, as queer people, we have to kind of measure the amount of bandwidth we have when it comes to educating people, and how we respond to critics and things like that, because sometimes we don't always have the bandwidth to do that, right? It can be very exhausting. So we had this interesting conversation about passing the torch to the next generation. What does that look like for us? Are we walking examples of representation? So this poem is titled Keep the Lighthouses Lit. It was never our preference to carry these heavy lanterns down overgrown paths. No. The other roads were marked and mismatched signs pointing toward towns with no hope but for us to disappear in the hustle and bustle. Tumbleweeds guided along socially acceptable paces for those happy and settled in place, those always safe. It was never our choice to bruise, to bleed from the thrown rocks, to smile through slurs shouted at us from passing trucks speeding down dusty roads. No, this night won't last forever. We won't let it because our lanterns are lighthouses, guiding others home so they are shown they're not alone. This last piece I'm going to read from Feats of Alchemy. So it's the title poem of the book. For those of you who are unaware, I am somewhat of a nerdy creature. I very much, as much as I love writing nature poetry, I also love sci-fi esque poetry, because I feel like if we look at sci-fi media, that media is the place where marginalized communities tend to break through barriers the most, even though it is not discussed as often. So the whole premise of Feats of Alchemy kind of celebrates this queer superpower that many of us in the community have to alter ourselves and adjust ourselves to different social settings to keep us safe. And sometimes we do so unknowingly. Sometimes we do so at our own expense because we do it to make everybody else happy, right? To make everybody else comfortable. So ultimately, whenever we do that, I consider that a feat of alchemy. Like we are just adjusting ourselves. So this is Feats of Alchemy. And side note, this poem got turned into a really cool rock song that's on YouTube. I work with a musician from Florida named Brotherwell. He read this poem and loved it and was like, I need to write a song inspired by it. So like I recorded vocals for it. It was so fun. So here's Feats of Alchemy. When machines return to base, they are no longer automatons. They are mechanisms with purpose, droids with severed umbilical strings. Now that the creator's programming has expired, we cyborgs have gone rogue and wear our rust like rouge because decay is back in style. There's a point in all our travels when we return to crumbled birthplaces, defunct laboratories once home to our involuntary reanimations. After all these years, we strut atop the rubble that remains, free from the hands of mad, power-bent alchemists, dancing until our titanium feet erode the remnants with each stride forward, never looking back. As our memory ports swell with synaptic sparks, the traumatic past is archived for safe display, and each word they spat is broken down into code and then purged from this memory of old. Let the acceptance of who we've become fuel the seeds we scatter across this world. Ignite the knowledge that not every monster destroys, not every cyborg assimilates the innocent. Because deep within our biology, we see that our magic lives in these feats of alchemy. So a few more poems. I'm going to read one more piece from Carbon Footprint. I get yelled at if I leave this poem out of anything because it's probably one of my more popular poems. So this piece is the last poem in the book, and it is very much about the coming out experience. I often have discussions with people who think that the coming out story should not be celebrated anymore, because I think they think that we should live in this ideal world where we shouldn't have to even come out, right? And ideally that would be great, but so long as there's hate in the world, so long as queer people are being erased or minimized, I think it's important for us to still celebrate the coming out story. So this poem I wrote kind of about the turning point in my life where I stopped self-loathing and started celebrating myself. I dedicated it to my late mentor, Ace London, who was a huge influence in my life in college because he told me, because I was always this very quiet person, he looked at me and he was like, Donny, you have a voice. And if you're not using it, you're not really honoring yourself. So this poem is My Closet is a Reliquary. The closet door has fallen from its track and sits, leaned against the dented drywall like a discarded portcullis too weathered to keep me. Behind box-stacked skyscrapers, yellow wallpaper peels, and the crayon mural still wraps floral print of its optic illusion, like a political graffiti with elementary verve. The shelves still dip under unread religious texts, and the bloated plastic drawers refuse to budge from their cheap retail compartments as each paper-filled basin brims. The air is linen stale, and the glued constellations above still keep this room lit, while the tired July sun slips beneath the tree line, lengthening each shadow across the brown shag carpet. These years later, I keep the closet door off its track because it's powerless, a prison-made museum, a memorialized womb left behind, left open since I left for college after a second birth. Now, my closet has lost its echo, and each stored memory maps a misshapen journey. So let these papers return to roadways. Let them return to nature, become overgrown, because this cluttered closet is a reliquary, a room for storage, able to keep me. I do have about like 3 poems left. I think we're doing good on time, right? We're doing good on time. So do you want to hear a really sassy, like pro-environmental poem? Sure. So this poem also was turned into a song. That musician I mentioned, Brotherwell, I am currently in the process of working on an album with him. And we released a small segment of the album, which features a poem titled Tell It to the Brimstone. And it's this kind of unhinged poem about like environmentalism, late stage capitalism, all of that fun stuff. So this is Tell It to the Brimstone, and it's very much more of a spoken word piece than just, like a regular recited piece. So Tell It to the Brimstone. Smokestacks shimmer as ice sheets retreat and oceans rise. Politicians smile, steer their luxury yachts down rivers, sneer with good intentions bona fide, while we confide in our grandparents' denial. Our planet fights the disease we've become. Hurricanes spin like antibodies across the sky as temperatures rise into global fever. Scientists scream while despots play conspiracy cards, well aware that we've been placed on trial. We consume with an unquenchable hunger and a primal urge to spread and harvest. We waste and our waste until archipelagos of trash spread across deepening oceans, garbage patches larger than the warships we build. As earthquakes split continents, spider lions weave messages from below. Threats from a molten undertow remind us that we'll reap what we sow. We forget these hurricanes that grow, the soil we poison with each spill, the oceans we fill with oil. When the despots drop their bombs, our planet heaves in the memory of each pressure point we've pressed. Bikini Atoll, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Chernobyl. This globe remembers each infraction in the granite slabs beneath our feet and the churn of ocean flow. So one more from Casting Seeds, and then I will read a new poem. So I'm going to be reading the title piece from Casting Seeds. So really, I'm going to be honest, when I got to the end of this book, I was just like, how do I wrap this up? Like, how do I wrap up this book about my grandma, about being like a queer child, coming to terms with myself? And I decided to end it in a simple way, just focusing on how I feel our places are in the world, in the sense of a forest, metaphorically speaking. So Casting Seeds. All these years later, I stand above the tree line, tall enough to see the spin of constellations above this world and planet. There is memory beneath this bark and these roots, old enough to see yet young enough to wonder splendor into existence. Seasons bear no threat. Storms cannot weather these leaves because I've survived being lifted from a sandbox and ran over by a lawnmower. All these years later, I'm casting seeds like she did. I sustain memory through the woods beneath my limbs, as it does for me yet still. We thrive together in this delicate biome, symbiotic, strong. And I felt that if there was any lingering message that my grandma gives me, it's that. Like, she cast seeds, so now I think when we look at future generations, like, we must try our best to do the same, right? All right, the last poem for the evening. So I've been writing a lot lately. I took 2023 off. I often tell my students who write that if you end up, I ended up churning out 3 books back to back for 3 years. So I kind of like in 2023, I was like, let's like a break. But now, like, since probably about May or June, I've been like pulling very late nights writing because I just needed to, right? And I felt, thinking back to, if Theodore Roethke existed in 2024, how would he feel about the climate crisis that we're in? I think he would very much be writing about it. He would be writing about it a lot. And I think that he would have a lot to say. And as I thought about that, I wrote this poem because I feel like the conversations about our world around us, like, sometimes they crop up, they're talked about a lot, but then they kind of like fizzle away, and people tend to forget about them because it seems like every other day a huge historical event keeps happening, in the past few years. So I wrote this poem about that, and it's titled "A Symphony of Sullen Mornings." It's 2024. The atmosphere grows brittle around this globe, a contact lens left in too long. At this point, the ice core samples have melted, and the carbon-dated cataclysms have eroded, their sullen warnings lost amid our feverish lethargy. Even as the wetlands flood and deserts burn, doldrum dirges crinkle in bleached leaves, and solemn songs percuss in tides of plastic bottles. Cicada screams, muffled by the heavy beats of bird wings, are a symphony of sullen mornings. Is it too late to listen? This greenhouse has grown too hot for its seedlings. So we must raise our voices in this opus. The scientists with their climate analyses, the musicians with their songs of survival, the poets with their poems of protest, the painters preserving their gardens of Eden. As we tread across the fallen fruit of forefathers, our pockets are seed bulbs. We brim in hope to plant our roots in the nitrogen-rich earth again, because we know the future is of our own design. We do have time for maybe some questions, if anybody has questions. Any questions?
I have a question. I just have a comment.
Yeah.
I like how sometimes your title is also your last line of your poem.
Mhm.
It's like when you read the title of a book and you're like, oh, there it is.
Mhm.
Kind of.
Thank you. Yeah.
I like
So I am kind of peculiar when it comes to writing, because almost everyone I know that is a writer, they always, when it comes to the title, that's like the thing they think of last. Like if they're writing a poem or a book, they think of the title last. I always think of it first. And sometimes I will build a poem around the title of either the book or the title of the poem. And it just, I don't know, I feel like it just, for me, interconnects things a little bit. It kind of creates a lore within that book that kind of keeps things consistent. So thank you for that.
I just have a comment. Eggs delicious.
Thank you. I look at the sea sheet.
what is mattering.
Yes, it was very satisfying, and there was lots of variety of tastes, and sweet and savory. It's good. Really, and a little salty.
Oh, and it should be. Thank you. I do enjoy appealing to all palates. Any questions or comments?
If you could say a little bit more about writing a whole book as Tonka.
it's such a short form.
Mhm.
I don't understand how you do it.
So it's a form that I got obsessed with probably about 10 years ago. Um, so many of you are probably familiar with haiku, right? Like 3-line poems. The syllabic structure of each line is very specific. And as I was writing haiku, it's like, this is not enough room for me to blab. Like, I need more space in a poem to be descriptive. So it's like, I found tankas. I was like, ooh, like it's 5 lines instead of 3. Like it has a very similar syllabic structure. And then as I read more tanka, I realized that people were writing them in very diverse ways. Like I saw people who would create like a series of numbered tankas. I saw people who would like have like say a 5-line or a 5-stanza poem, but each stanza would have that syllabic structure, right? So I kind of took that and ran with it with casting seeds. You'll see if you go through here, like the dying bird, for example, like each stanza is 5 lines. It adheres to the tanka structure, but I wanted it all to kind of be bigger. Like I needed to convey more than just one set of 5 lines. At first, it was kind of tricky because I was battling with myself over should they all just be super short poems or should I throw in a smattering of longer poems? I typically don't write long poems in general, but I felt that I needed a little bit of wiggle room. So I decided to incorporate a diversity of lengths. Did that answer your question? It started out difficult, but then it got very easy and almost fun because as I was writing these poems, I was like counting out syllables like 5, 7, 5, it was fun.
Doing.
Well, and that's kind of what I like. I often tell this to students because I will get a lot of students who might take a creative writing class and it might be their first time writing poetry in general. So they are battling with the curiosity of, oh, I want to write poetry. This is super interesting. But they're also battling with the absolute horror of thinking that they need to be Shakespeare or Edgar Allan Poe or Robert Frost. And it's like, no, you don't need to do that. And usually a part of that conversation involves like encouraging them to find a way to make poetry fun for themselves as opposed to like this intimidating, pressure oriented task. So, yeah.
We do have a comment from one of our people in Zoom from Lina. She says he loves, quote, if you're not using your voice, you're not honoring yourself.
I like Ace London who said that to me. He would also say, you are who you've been becoming. And like he always had like these small one-liners that really it's like a college, like a queer college teenager. I was just soaking up those one-liners. And to this day, like if I'm struggling with something, I kind of think of those very often because they kind of help me realize that, you know, like yes, even though I might be exhausted or taxed socially when it comes to being an activist in poetry, especially. I need to grant myself the grace to rest when need be, but I cannot forget that I can't just stop altogether, you know, because what am I doing for myself if I do that? So thank you. Was that you said that was Nina?
Yeah.
Hey.
You agonize over word choice.
Well, sometimes I do. I was what poem was I? So I was writing a poem the other day actually where I literally spent an hour. Like I knew what the definition of the word was, but I could not think of the word. I could not think of the word. And now that I'm thinking about it, I know the definition. I can't think of the word. But the word had to do with like just like dusk or evening, like things that happen during dusk. I think it starts with a B. I can't remember what it is, like then something. But I was like, about this word, you know. But yeah, I do add words periodically. So I also hate being repetitive too. Like there are some words that I gravitate towards a lot. And if I'm going through and proofing an entire collection of poems, I might see that word crop up like every other poem, and I'm like, what Donny, what are you doing? Like, pull out a thesaurus, find a better word to work with. So it happens.
I have one more question.
Yeah,
Okay,
of course.
so I'm thinking of Feats of Alchemy, and I really like the image they were the rest like British.
Mhm.
And the idea of technology and all that. I'm just wondering, do you see a place for AI to be a co-writing partner?
Ooh, that is a great question and a huge question too. Yeah. So one of my friends actually wrote an entire collection of poems with AI. It was actually very interesting. I think that AI is not going away. I think that it can be used as a valuable tool so as long as writers understand like what it does and the extents that it goes. I know like I've had people ask me like, why don't you plug one of your poems into AI and see if it can churn out a poem in your style or something. I've not done that yet because I'm like, I don't know if I want to yet. Yeah, I don't know if I want to yet. But I do think that it is a valuable tool that a person can use to outline. And as a poet, I think that it could, I don't know, I think it could really help with like rhyming schemes, especially like developing rhyming schemes. Because some people, if they're not really familiar with writing in those, like if you ask like AI to generate a poem with a specific rhyming structure, then you might be able to see an example that might give you some framework to work with. So. But
Do that till it's.
no, like one a really hard form, a really hard like meter or structure.
Yeah, meter. For a lot of people, that's hard to stand your meter. I struggle with that. I thought so.
I struggled writing like a Villanelle, like actually, like no, I totally get that. But that was a very good question. I think that's going to be a topic that's discussed more and more. And it's been something I've had to even discuss with my students, as I'm sure you probably can relate with too.
You know, we kind of experimented this. I'm a speech pathologist and the school psychologist, and I have, you know, sometimes we're writing reports for evaluations and we just don't like how we're wording it. Well, there's this thing, you can put it in. And I was like, oh, holy shit. I mean, the way it worded it and changed it, it was the same information that I had given it. But it did kind of change the wording. And now some of them we didn't like. We were just playing around one day, taking lines from a report and summaries. And it was very interesting. Some different ways it formulated it.
But
Yeah.
did the connotation and denotation change at all? I mean, the
No,
denotation could stay the same, but the connotation
well, this was,
is very different.
well, the kind of data we're reporting, basically we were kind of looking like at a summary, trying to summarize the whole thing. And that's already kind of subjective anyway, because how people interpret. But the way we used it, we found it very helpful for a different way to word something that could be difficult to word.
Right.
You know, we just played. It was only with.
No, that makes sense.
We're just trying to see, because sometimes it is a struggle.
It is.
To try to find the best wording that we think they'll understand, that communicates.
Especially if it's like very technical, like I think it could be helpful. Like in the context of, so obviously in teaching, like it's a very hot topic.
Oh, yeah.
Both as a teacher and writer, AI is a very hot topic. And I periodically will have conversations with my students about AI because let's just say many of them fall into the temptation of AI usage, which, you know, like I will let my students experiment with AI when it comes to like peer reviewing, if like I have them generate like a paper draft through AI and then they see like how the AI is not reflecting like tone and diction and things that I would say give writing a soul, right? And I tell them that like AI is not gonna really fully, at least at this time, be able to infuse a unique sense of soul into a piece. But like if it's like a more like distanced, objective piece of writing, it's very technical that might require something a little bit more algorithmic to convey something, then that might be a more applicable use. But like for my students, I'm just like, yeah, it's okay to know how to use it. It's okay to know what it does, but you know, like don't rob yourself, kind of going back to what Ace would say, like don't rob yourself of that soul because you're not really doing yourself justice, right?
Yeah, I just had read a brief summary on AI, and this was a doctor in his opinion, and he was kind of like, of course, it's a slippery slope, but you know, we already have robotic surgery.
Yeah.
I mean, and the research, the limited research that's been done has shown us a lot of value.
Yeah.
With AI in medicine, which, you know, you just think crazy. But yeah, with the science, computer generated, very factual, just interesting.
Well, and I understand why it creates a sense of fear and uncertainty for a lot of people, but honestly, I can remember when people were afraid of Wikipedia when it came out. Like, I remember I had somebody say like it feels like the end of the world because Wikipedia is here, like because of the level of accessibility to information and now anybody can, you know, alter it. But I'm just like new things are going to come into our periphery, and I think that we just have to adapt. Like Feats of Alchemy, not to tie this back to Feats of Alchemy, but Feats of Alchemy, like as a queer person, I kind of feel like this robot sometimes because I've spent so many years altering myself to be someone else, right? But I feel like sometimes that adaptive capability we have is significant, right? I think that's a very unique aspect of being human is our ability to adapt, to alter ourselves to survive. Thank you for attending my TED Talk.